Las Vegas in the early 1940s was nothing more than a dusty, quiet town in the middle of the Nevada desert. A place where cowboys, railroad workers, and construction crews from the Hoover Dam passed through, but few stayed for long. It had a handful of legal casinos, small-time gambling halls, and bars catering to travelers, but it was far from the neon-lit paradise of today. Yet to a certain group of men who understood money, crime, and power, Las Vegas was a gold mine waiting to be tapped. The Mafia saw what others did not: a city with no strong police force, a place where gambling was not only legal but encouraged, and a future where their influence could go unchecked. In the early 20th century, the Mafia thrived in cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. They controlled illegal liquor during Prohibition, ran loan sharking and protection rackets, and had a firm grip on unions. But with Prohibition ending and law enforcement beginning to catch up, the crime syndicates needed new avenues for revenue. Illegal gambling had always been a major moneymaker, but it came with risks: constant police raids, payoffs to corrupt officials, and the ever-present threat of getting shut down. But Las Vegas? Las Vegas was different. Here, gambling was legal, and in the Mafia's world, that meant an open door to a new empire. The state of Nevada had legalized gambling in 1931 as a desperate attempt to bring in revenue during the Great Depression. For years, the industry remained small, with modest casinos run by local businessmen. But as the city grew, so did its potential. The completion of the Hoover Dam in 1936 brought a flood of workers and travelers into the region, many of whom had cash to burn. The desert town was transforming, and organized crime was taking notice. It started with small-time mobsters from Los Angeles, men like Guy McAfee, a former LAPD vice squad officer who had switched sides and now ran illegal casinos in California. When law enforcement cracked down on his operations, McAfee packed up and moved to Las Vegas, where he opened the Golden Nugget and other gambling halls. He wasn't alone. Other small-time operators followed, seeing the city as a place where they could run casinos without the constant fear of being shut down. But these early operators were only a preview of what was to come. The real power shift happened when the East Coast syndicates started looking west. The likes of Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and Lucky Luciano had built financial empires in illegal gambling and wanted a way to make their earnings look legitimate. Las Vegas offered them a chance to do just that. These were men who understood not just crime, but business: how to invest, how to expand, how to control operations without leaving a trace. They weren't just gangsters. They were businessmen in the shadows. The Mafia didn't rush in all at once. They started small, laundering money through local casinos, taking silent stakes in hotels, and quietly influencing who got licenses to operate. But the real turning point came when Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, a flashy, ambitious mobster with a taste for high living, arrived in Las Vegas. Unlike others before him, Siegel didn't just see a chance to make money. He saw a chance to create something grand, something that would change the city forever. Before Siegel's arrival, Las Vegas casinos were simple gambling halls, places where working men played poker or rolled dice after a long day. But Siegel had seen the luxurious casino resorts of Europe and wanted to bring that level of glamour to the desert. He envisioned a Las Vegas filled with high-end hotels, fine dining, and entertainment that would attract the rich and famous. This wasn't just about running casinos. It was about creating an empire. Siegel's vision was bold, but it required money, and lots of it. Luckily for him, he had the backing of Meyer Lansky and the rest of the East Coast Syndicate. They were willing to fund his dream, but only if it would turn a profit. The Flamingo Hotel, Siegel's grand project, was supposed to be the start of a new Las Vegas, a city no longer just for drifters and workers, but for Hollywood stars, millionaires, and anyone willing to bet big. But Siegel's involvement wasn't just about business. He was a man of ego, of charm, and of danger. He didn't just want to run a casino, he wanted to own the city. He walked into Las Vegas like a king taking his throne, brushing aside the smaller operators and making it clear that this was now Mafia territory. He promised the bosses back east that the Flamingo would be a game changer, a place that would make them all millions. And for a while, they believed him. But with big dreams came big risks. Siegel's project ran over budget, way over budget. What was supposed to cost a few million turned into a financial disaster, with Siegel spending money recklessly on lavish decor, unnecessary luxuries, and paying off anyone who stood in his way. The Mafia, known for patience when profits were steady, had little tolerance for failure. Siegel's charm could only take him so far. Even as the Flamingo struggled to get off the ground, the Mafia continued to deepen its hold on Las Vegas. They saw the potential of the city, beyond just Siegel's dream. Casino licenses were handed out with bribes, hotel managers were chosen by mob bosses, and the profits, millions in cash, were skimmed off before ever hitting the books. Las Vegas wasn't just a place to make money, it was a place to launder money. Illegal cash from drug sales, extortion, and loan sharking across the country flowed into Vegas casinos, turning dirty money clean with every spin of the roulette wheel. The law was slow to catch on. Nevada's politicians were more interested in keeping the casinos open and the money flowing than in investigating where the funds came from. Corruption ran deep, with local officials turning a blind eye in exchange for a cut of the profits. In Las Vegas, the Mafia didn't need to hide in the shadows. They operated in plain sight, building an empire one casino at a time. By the time the 1940s came to a close, Las Vegas was no longer just a desert town. It was a city on the rise, with hotels, casinos, and nightclubs drawing people from all over the country. But behind the neon signs and bright lights, it was the Mafia pulling the strings. They had turned an empty stretch of land into the gambling capital of the world, and they weren't done yet. Las Vegas had become their playground, their fortress, their biggest score. The city belonged to them, and for the next few decades, they would make sure it stayed that way. The Flamingo Hotel stood as the crown jewel of Bugsy Siegel's vision, but behind its gleaming facade, trouble was brewing. Construction delays, ballooning costs, and Siegel's own reckless spending had turned what was supposed to be a quick and lucrative investment into a money pit. The Mafia bosses back east, Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano, and Frank Costello, had bankrolled the project expecting quick returns. Instead, they found themselves pouring more and more money into a casino that seemed cursed from the start. Siegel, always the charmer, assured his partners that the Flamingo would be a gold mine once it opened. He convinced them that Hollywood stars, high rollers, and the country's wealthiest gamblers would flock to Las Vegas, turning the Flamingo into an empire. But by late 1946, patience was running thin. The Mafia wasn't a bank. They expected results, and Siegel was running out of time. When the Flamingo finally opened its doors on December 26, 1946, it was a disaster. Rain poured down over Las Vegas, keeping visitors away. The casino floor was operational, but the hotel rooms weren't finished, meaning guests had nowhere to stay. The promised stream of celebrities barely materialized, and those who did show up lost their money and left. Within weeks, the casino was hemorrhaging cash. The Mafia bosses, already skeptical, saw the writing on the wall. This wasn't a business investment anymore. It was a liability. Siegel was desperate. He knew that failure wasn't just bad for his reputation. It was deadly. He poured more money into the Flamingo, pushing to get the hotel and amenities completed. By March 1947, the casino was finally starting to turn a profit. But it was too little, too late. The bosses back in New York and Chicago had already made their decision. Siegel had cost them millions, and in the Mafia, debts of that size weren't forgiven. On the night of June 20, 1947, Bugsy Siegel sat in the living room of his girlfriend Virginia Hill's Beverly Hills mansion, flipping through a copy of the Los Angeles Times. He had no idea that across the country, Lansky and the others had already decided his fate. At exactly 10:45 p.m., a barrage of bullets tore through the window, striking Siegel multiple times in the head and torso. He was dead before he hit the ground. The man who had dreamed of turning Las Vegas into the gambling capital of the world was now just another cautionary tale in the world of organized crime. But the Mafia didn't abandon the Flamingo. Within hours of Siegel's assassination, his former associates moved in, taking full control of the hotel. Meyer Lansky, always the pragmatist, ensured that the Flamingo became profitable under new management. And with Siegel out of the way, the Mafia's grip on Las Vegas tightened. This was no longer about a single hotel. This was about an empire. With the success of the Flamingo, other crime families saw their opportunity. The Chicago outfit, led by men like Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana, wanted their piece of the action. New York's Genovese and Gambino families began investing in casinos, using frontmen and dummy corporations to mask their involvement. The Desert Inn, the Sands, the Riviera, the Stardust, all of them had Mafia money flowing through their walls. Skimming became the foundation of the Mafia's control. Every casino had its books, the numbers reported to the government. But those weren't the real numbers. Before any revenue was declared, before any profits were taxed, millions were taken off the top and funneled back to the bosses. Hidden counting rooms, secret passageways, and corrupt accountants ensured that the mob got its cut. A single casino could pull in millions a year in untraceable cash, money that funded Mafia operations across the country. Violence was always lurking beneath the surface. Las Vegas might have looked like a city of glitz and glamour, but those who stepped out of line were quickly reminded of who really ran the town. Casino managers who refused to play ball disappeared. Union leaders who threatened the mob's control were found dead in the desert. Loan sharks worked the floors of every casino, offering cash to desperate gamblers at impossible interest rates. Those who couldn't pay back their debts weren't given second chances. But the Mafia also understood the importance of keeping up appearances. They wanted Las Vegas to be a place where families and tourists felt safe, where politicians and law enforcement wouldn't interfere. They used their influence to keep crime out of sight, bribing local officials to turn a blind eye. Nevada's weak regulatory system made it easy. As long as the casinos paid their taxes and kept the money flowing, the government had little interest in asking where it all came from. By the mid-1950s, Las Vegas had become the crown jewel of the Mafia's empire. It was no longer just a desert town. It was the gambling capital of the world. Celebrities flocked to perform in the showrooms, high rollers arrived in private planes, and the money never stopped flowing. The Mafia had built a kingdom in the desert, and for a time it seemed untouchable. But cracks were beginning to form. The FBI was starting to take notice, gathering intelligence on the mob's stranglehold over the city. Journalists were digging deeper, exposing the connections between crime families and casino operations. And within the Mafia itself, tensions were rising. As more money poured in, greed and betrayal threatened to tear apart the very empire they had built. For now, the Mafia remained in control, their grip on Las Vegas stronger than ever. But the golden age wouldn't last forever. The seeds of their downfall had already been planted, and in the years to come, the forces that had allowed them to thrive would begin to turn against them. Las Vegas had been built on crime, ambition, and blood. And as the city grew, so too did the enemies of the men who had made it what it was. The Mafia had created a paradise in the desert, but every empire has its reckoning, and theirs was coming. The Mafia's control over Las Vegas was now absolute. The Flamingo had been stabilized, other crime families had moved in, and the money was flowing like never before. What had started as a vision, a risky investment in a desert town, had become the beating heart of organized crime's financial empire. The city's skyline was expanding, and with every new casino, the Mafia's influence grew stronger. Las Vegas had become a place where fortunes were made, but for the men who ran it, the real money wasn't in gambling. It was in skimming. The skimming operations were meticulous, precise, and nearly impossible to trace. Money flowed into the casinos in stacks of unrecorded cash, funneled through hidden rooms before a single dollar ever hit the official ledgers. Each casino had its own system, its own network of trusted accountants and corrupt officials who ensured that the real profits never saw the light of day. Some of the stolen money was funneled back to mob families in New York, Chicago, and Kansas City. Some of it funded drug operations, loan sharking rings, and bribery schemes. But all of it kept the Mafia's grip on Las Vegas strong. Behind the scenes, a silent war was raging over control of the most profitable casinos. The Chicago outfit had taken a dominant position, with men like Johnny Roselli and Anthony Spilotro, ensuring that the city remained under mob rule. The New York families had their own stake, and smaller crime organizations tried to muscle in wherever they could. But competition in the Mafia world didn't come with lawsuits or boardroom negotiations. It came with blood. By the late 1950s, Las Vegas had become a battlefield, though most tourists never saw it. Casino executives who refused to cooperate were found in the desert, buried in shallow graves. Employees suspected of stealing from the skim were tortured, their bodies dumped as a warning to others. Rival gangsters who tried to carve out their own piece of the city met their end in hotel rooms and alleyways. The Mafia didn't tolerate betrayal, and in Las Vegas betrayal had deadly consequences. Despite the violence lurking beneath the surface, Las Vegas had become America's playground. Celebrities like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. were regulars at the Sands and the Desert Inn. The Rat Pack wasn't just entertainment. They were an extension of the Mafia's charm offensive. Sinatra, in particular, had close ties to mobsters, often acting as their go-between with politicians and Hollywood elites. He wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol of Las Vegas's seductive power. And it worked. Tourists poured in from across the country, drawn to the city's reputation for excitement, luxury, and easy money. They never questioned who was really running things. The casinos operated like well-oiled machines, ensuring that gamblers always felt like they were winning, until they weren't. Meanwhile, in back rooms and penthouses, Mafia bosses counted their real winnings, knowing that as long as Las Vegas remained under their control, they would never have to worry about running out of cash. But as the 1960s rolled in, trouble was brewing. The U.S. government was beginning to take a serious interest in Las Vegas. The FBI, long focused on the Mafia's activities in New York and Chicago, now turned its attention to the desert city. J. Edgar Hoover, once dismissive of organized crime, had come under pressure to act. Wiretaps, undercover agents, and informants began infiltrating the mob's operations. At the same time, a new and unexpected player entered the scene, Howard Hughes. The eccentric billionaire, known for his aviation empire and Hollywood connections, had become obsessed with Las Vegas. In 1966, he checked into the Desert Inn and refused to leave. Instead of being thrown out, he did what only a man of his wealth could do. He bought the entire hotel. Then, he bought another. And another. Within a few years, Hughes had spent hundreds of millions acquiring casino properties, effectively pushing the Mafia aside. The shift was subtle at first, but the implications were enormous. Hughes represented corporate America, and corporate America had no interest in dealing with the Mafia. Where the mob had relied on corruption and intimidation, Hughes operated through legal channels. He paid his taxes, filed official reports, and refused to allow skimming in his hotels. And worst of all, he attracted government oversight. The Mafia wasn't about to give up Las Vegas without a fight, but they were facing a new kind of enemy. The FBI was closing in, their financial schemes were being exposed, and the days of unchecked power were coming to an end. The golden age of the Mafia in Las Vegas had reached its peak, and from here there was only one direction left to go: down. But the end wouldn't come quickly, and it wouldn't come quietly. The Mafia had spent decades building Las Vegas, and they weren't about to let it go without a war. What came next would be some of the bloodiest, most chaotic years in the city's history. And when the dust finally settled, Las Vegas would never be the same again. The Mafia had spent decades turning Las Vegas into their empire, but now their control was slipping. The arrival of Howard Hughes had changed everything. What had once been a city ruled by mobsters in silk suits was slowly being transformed into a corporate-run gambling haven. But the Mafia wasn't ready to surrender. They had fought too hard, spilled too much blood, and made too much money to simply walk away. For a while they adapted. Hughes might have been buying up casinos, but he couldn't own them all. The Mafia still had their strongholds: the Stardust, the Tropicana, the Fremont, the Hacienda. The skimming operations continued, but now they were under more scrutiny than ever. The government was watching. The FBI had begun planting wiretaps, flipping low-level employees, and using informants to expose the mob's grip on the city. Despite the pressure, the Mafia wasn't about to abandon Las Vegas. If anything, they doubled down. Anthony "Tony the Ant" Spilotro, a ruthless Chicago enforcer, was sent to Las Vegas in the early 1970s to protect the mob's interests. Spilotro wasn't just a businessman. He was a killer, a man known for his brutality and willingness to do whatever it took to keep the Mafia in power. He set up shop in Vegas and quickly established himself as the enforcer of the underworld. Spilotro didn't just oversee the skimming operations. He ran a criminal empire of his own. Under his watch, the Hole-in-the-Wall gang was formed, a crew of thieves and gangsters who carried out burglaries, jewelry heists, and loan-sharking schemes across the city. They stole from businesses, strong-armed casino owners, and made sure no one challenged Mafia authority. Anyone who crossed Spilotro ended up in the desert, never to be seen again. But Spilotro's presence only drew more heat. The FBI had been tightening its grip on Las Vegas, but now they had a face to their investigation. Spilotro's violent tactics, once effective in keeping people quiet, were starting to backfire. The more bodies that turned up, the more determined law enforcement became to take him down. Meanwhile, the casino skimming operations were finally unraveling. The FBI had managed to infiltrate key casino operations and collect enough evidence to indict some of the biggest Mafia figures in the country. Wiretaps recorded conversations of mobsters discussing how money was skimmed from Las Vegas and sent back to the crime families in Chicago, Kansas City, and New York. Undercover agents posed as casino workers, documenting the secret counting rooms where millions of dollars were stolen before ever reaching the official books. The crackdown was relentless. One by one, Mafia bosses were arrested, their financial empires exposed. High-ranking figures like Frank "Lefty" Rosenthal, a Chicago mob associate who had been running the Stardust and other casinos, found themselves in the government's crosshairs. Rosenthal had been one of the most powerful men in Las Vegas, a gambling genius who helped the mob maximize its profits. But when federal agents started closing in, he knew the game was up. Rosenthal's downfall came when authorities denied him a gaming license, forcing him to step away from the casino industry. Without him, the Mafia's hold on the Stardust and other key properties weakened. The government had made it clear Las Vegas was no longer a city where the Mafia could operate without consequence. But the final blow came from within. The Mafia had always relied on loyalty, on the unbreakable code of silence known as omerta. But as more arrests were made, that code began to crack. Facing long prison sentences, Some mobsters did the unthinkable. They turned informant. High-ranking members of the Kansas City and Chicago crime families agreed to testify against their former allies, revealing the intricate details of how millions of dollars had been stolen from Las Vegas casinos over the years. As the trials played out, the Mafia's grip on Las Vegas crumbled. Casino executives were arrested, mob bosses were sentenced to life in prison, and the skimming operations that had kept the Mafia rich for decades were shut down for good. And then there was Spilotro. By the early 1980s, his unchecked violence and arrogance had made him a liability. The Chicago outfit, once his biggest supporter, had grown tired of his reckless behavior. He had drawn too much attention, cost them too much money. In 1986, the order came down. Spilotro had to go. He and his brother Michael were lured to a meeting in an Illinois basement, believing they were being promoted within the Mafia. Instead, they were beaten to death, their bodies buried in a shallow grave in an Indiana cornfield. It was a brutal end for a man who had ruled Las Vegas with an iron fist. By the time the 1980s came to a close, the Mafia's reign over Las Vegas was finished. The corporations had won. The casinos were now controlled by publicly traded companies, regulated by strict gaming laws, and monitored by law enforcement agencies that would no longer turn a blind eye. Las Vegas had changed. The old days of mobsters running the city from the shadows were over, but the impact of the Mafia would never truly disappear. The glitz, the glamour, the high-stakes world of Sin City, all of it had been built on the backs of the men who once ran it with blood and fear. Their empire was gone, but their legacy remained, buried beneath the neon lights and the never-ending hum of the slot machines. Las Vegas had entered a new era, but the ghosts of its past still lingered. The Mafia's reign had come to a violent and chaotic end, its enforcers buried in the desert, and its financial empires dismantled by law enforcement. The corporations had taken over, Wall Street had moved in, and the city was no longer a playground for mobsters, but a carefully regulated entertainment empire. Yet, despite the official narrative that organized crime had been wiped out, its influence could still be felt in every flashing light, every packed casino floor, and every whispered story about how the city had been built. As the 1990s arrived, Las Vegas was undergoing a transformation. The old mob-run casinos, the Stardust, the Desert Inn, the Hacienda, were slowly disappearing, replaced by massive resort-style hotels. The Mirage, built by Steve Wynn in 1989, marked the beginning of a new era. It wasn't just a casino, it was an experience, a luxury resort designed to attract families, honeymooners, and international tourists, not just high rollers and gamblers. This was the future of Las Vegas, and it left no room for the Mafia. The new corporate owners operated differently. They didn't need backroom deals or cash skimming operations. Instead, they played by the rules, using stock market investments, marketing campaigns, and strategic partnerships to build their wealth. The money was still flowing, but now it was being funneled through legal channels. The casino bosses no longer feared a bullet in the back of the head if they lost money. They feared a bad quarterly earnings report. The government had ensured that the Mafia could never return. Gaming regulations were stricter than ever, requiring extensive background checks on casino investors. Surveillance technology had advanced, making it nearly impossible to skim money unnoticed. The days of secret counting rooms and hidden cash drop-offs were over. But while the Mafia no longer had a seat at the table, many of the men who had worked for them found ways to stay in the business, just on the other side of the law. Some former mob associates transitioned into legitimate business roles, consulting for the new corporate casino owners who still valued their knowledge of the industry. Others moved into sports betting, nightlife, or high-end real estate, industries that thrived in Las Vegas without direct ties to the gambling business. The Mafia's presence had been erased from the history books, but its veterans had not simply vanished. They adapted, just as the city itself had adapted. Despite the crackdown, remnants of organized crime still surfaced from time to time. Loan sharking, illegal bookmaking, and underground gambling rings continued to exist in the shadows, though they were a far cry from the Mafia's former empire. Some small-time operators tried to reclaim a piece of the old underworld, but they lacked the power and infrastructure to make a real impact. The new Las Vegas was too clean, too corporate, too well guarded against the kind of criminal enterprise that had once ruled it. But if the Mafia had lost control, it had won something else: immortality. Its role in shaping Las Vegas was undeniable, a story that would forever be intertwined with the city's legend. Hollywood turned the rise and fall of the mob in Vegas into gold, with movies like Casino, 1995, exposing the brutal realities of the era. The film, based on the real-life story of Frank Rosenthal and Tony Spilotro, painted an unflinching portrait of a time when the Mafia's grip on Las Vegas was absolute, and its downfall inevitable. The city itself embraced its past, even as it moved forward. The old mob-run casinos were demolished, replaced by extravagant resorts with themes of ancient Rome, Paris, and Venice. The Las Vegas Strip became a spectacle, a family-friendly fantasy land filled with roller coasters, fountains, and world-class shows. But just off the Strip, the old Vegas could still be felt. The neon glow of Fremont Street, the classic casinos that had survived the transition, the quiet whispers in the back rooms where high-stakes games were still played in secrecy. The Mob Museum, opened in 2012 in downtown Las Vegas, became a permanent reminder of the city's origins. Inside, visitors could see the weapons, photographs, and FBI wiretaps that documented how the Mafia had built Las Vegas and how it had lost it. The museum didn't glorify organized crime, but it didn't hide the truth either. Without the Mafia, there would be no Las Vegas as the world knew it. By the 2000s, Las Vegas had completed its evolution. It was no longer just a gambling town. It was an entertainment empire, home to massive conventions, world-class restaurants, luxury shopping, and the biggest stars in music and sports. The Mafia had been exiled, replaced by corporate executives in suits instead of gangsters in silk shirts. The game had changed, but the city's spirit remained the same, a place where fortunes were won and lost, where ambition and excess ruled, and where the past was never truly forgotten. Today, when visitors walk the Strip, they see the bright lights, the billion-dollar hotels, the illusion of a city built on luxury and dreams. But beneath it all, the foundations were laid by men who lived and died by a different code. The Mafia didn't just shape Las Vegas, they made it. And no matter how much time passes, no matter how many skyscrapers replace the old casinos, the city will always carry the mark of the men who built it with blood, money, and ambition. Las Vegas wasn't built on luck. It was built on crime, on power, on the ruthless pursuit of fortune. The Mafia's empire may have crumbled, but their legacy will forever be etched into the very soul of Sin City.